We're
just a couple of minutes.
We're just going live now.
Our engineer's a bit slow, but
okay, we're live on YouTube now.
We okay?
Okay, if you wish to take it away, David.
Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming on this cold, rainy night, nothing like Israel. Tonight's very special as it's only 2 weeks to the first Israeli election. There are 3, and we're very lucky to have a top journalist expert in Israeli politics, James Marlow, and he'll try to answer the political chaos that we see over there. After that, we'll have, at the end of his talk, we'll have questions and answers. You can put questions in the chat box that we may use during the talk or use an electronic hand at the bottom right corner of the participants section. But please don't wave your hands as we can never see them. With a background of almost 40 years in broadcasting and journalism, James has covered Israeli elections since the 80s and has an extensive knowledge of the parties, candidates, PR voting systems, and analysing coalition agreements. He's been a reporter, correspondent, and anchor person with networks such as CNN, ITN, Euronews, Al Jazeera, LBC Radios, Reuters, and Israel's former IBA News. James has also written for the Daily Mail, Daily Express, Jerusalem Post, and numerous Jewish publications. He's currently a weekly columnist at the Jewish Weekly, which is the only newspaper outside of Israel that has such a huge coverage of the general election. So, James, over to you.
Thank you, David. And also, we've got another David who's doing the technical stuff and may ask me some questions as we go through. A very good evening to you, and thank you for joining us here this evening. You mentioned the weather in the UK. I can tell you in Jerusalem, it's also raining, and rain is expected tomorrow, but I'm not here to tell you the weather. I'm not the weatherman, although many years ago, I was offered a job on the BBC to be a weatherman, and I turned it down. But I got into the last 25 candidates out of, I think, 250. So thank you for bringing that memory back to me. My connection with the Edgware United Synagogue, besides actually growing up in Edgware and going to the shore in the early 1980s, is that for the last 3 elections, 2 out of 3 of them, I was there in person at the Edgware United Synagogue for, or just before, a general election, and we spoke about many aspects of the general election. It was back in 2019, if I recall. 2019 was the first of the current 4 elections. I think we missed out on the second one, and we might have done the third one. So we had a big turnout, especially the third one. Perhaps not because of myself, but maybe because Richard, the commander of British forces, Richard Kemp, was invited down, and at the last minute he called me and he couldn't make it. We had a big crowd, so I'm sure they didn't come to see me, but they came for Richard Kemp, who was the commander of British forces in Afghanistan. But we've moved on since then. As I predicted, there was going to be a 4th general election, and I think this shidduch came about because I was asked to say a couple of words for the Zionist Federation connected with the Edgware U. And David had called me afterwards and just said, you know, what are you doing in March? Maybe you could talk something about Israel in March. So I said, general election, I bet there's going to be one. And lo and behold, there is. So let's firstly just talk about the political arena as general. There are 39 political parties this time running. They are registered with the Central Elections Committee. That's slightly below the number which was expected. I expected it to be about 45, 46. And the reason for that is because several parties dropped out right before the deadline of closure for the submission of parties and candidates. Of those 39 competing parties, no more than maybe 11 or 12, maximum 13, are seen as having a realistic chance of winning a minimum of 3.25%, which is the minimum threshold in order to get into the Knesset. So if you do not reach that number, that means all your votes are thrown in the bin. And by the way, that's equivalent to 4 Knesset seats. So if you see a party registering 2 seats or 3 seats, they're not going to get in. They have to get a minimum of 4 seats. The main players, of course, are a party called the Likud party, which is led by Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm sure you've heard of him before. He is looking to extend his unprecedented 12 consecutive years as prime minister, plus the 3 years back in the 1990s. So that is a long, long time of being the Israeli prime minister. And he is looking right now for it to continue, because at the moment, the polls say his party is 10 seats ahead of his nearest rival, which is Yesh Atid. This time, Bibi is facing challenges primarily from the center to left, which is Yesh Atid. They're 10 seats behind. That party is led by Yair Lapid. The New Hope, which is a brand new party. It's a breakaway from the Likud. It's led by Gidon Sa'ar. He is exactly the same in terms of ideology on the right as Netanyahu. He believes in settlement building. He believes in, actually, he criticized Netanyahu because Netanyahu didn't go ahead with the annexation of parts of Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, in other words, Area C. And the reason why Netanyahu didn't go ahead with it was because it may have cost the peace treaty and the trade treaties with the UAE and Bahrain. So Netanyahu said, we're going to put that on hold and let's just work with the 2 Gulf states at this point. So Sa'ar criticized him for that. But other than being anti-Bibi, the policies are exactly the same. Then you have the right-wing Yamina party, Yamina being right. That's the meaning, led by Naftali Bennett. I'm sure many of you heard Naftali Bennett, polling around 11, 12 seats. Once again, there is no party on the left who's able to challenge the Likud party. So that remains the only party to beat. Now, what's interesting is that several of Netanyahu's fierce critics, people like Avi, I'm going to mention some names, perhaps it's going to go over the heads of some of you. I don't know how well you, of course, you're into Israeli politics, but Avi Nissenkorn, he was a major anti-Bibi person. He was a justice minister, and he's no longer around simply because he broke away from the Blue and White Party and he went to set up a new party with another man called Ofer Shelach, who was Yesh Atid's number 2. They weren't polling at all. They pulled out of the race. Ron Hudai is his name, Ron Hudai. He is the Tel Aviv mayor. He hates Netanyahu. He says, I'm going to run against Netanyahu. I'm going to be prime minister. I'm going to wipe him out. He initially started polling 7 seats, but then he made an unprecedented, silly statement to say, I'm against the health ministry and I'm going to open up Tel Aviv, of course, the COVID situation I'm talking about. And his party just started to go down in terms of popularity. And then it wasn't even registering 4 seats. Poll after poll showed that he was not going to get into the Knesset. He pulled out. Moshe Ya'alon, again, a right-wing former chief of staff person. He was part of the Likud. He was working with Netanyahu. He was Netanyahu's defense minister. But Netanyahu wanted to move him on to bring in Avigdor Lieberman. And so he moved him along. The man by the name of Moshe Ya'alon, he was so angry with Netanyahu because, as far as he was concerned, he was sacked as defense minister. He walked out of the cabinet. He walked out of the government. He actually resigned from the Likud party and said, I'm running as prime minister against Netanyahu. You see, it's all about ego. It's all about not getting on with your colleagues from the same political party. He started a political party called Telem, couldn't even register. He could not get enough votes. He joined up with the Blue and White, and eventually he stayed with Yesh Atid. He's recently broken away from Yesh Atid. He said, I'm going to run by myself. Again, didn't get enough votes. He's pulled out of the race. Remember, all of these are the biggest critics of Netanyahu, and they've all pulled out because they simply do not have the support. Then, of course, you've got Benny Gantz. He was the leader of this massive, great big anti-Netanyahu party called Blue and White. And Blue and White was a party, although they had some good candidates, Blue and White was a party that was literally made up of people from the right, from the center, and from the left. And from the far left, by the way, Avi Nissenkorn was part of the Histadrut, which is like equivalent to the TUC. And then you got people who believe very much in the free market economy and very much against socialization, socialism rather, and socialization, socialism, and the trade unions. And yet they were in a political party altogether in order to oust Netanyahu. And it didn't work. And eventually the Blue and White Party fell apart. In addition, the nightmare scenario for Netanyahu of Gideon Sa'ar, remember the party on the right, and Naftali Bennett, the party on the right, both of them have said Netanyahu should go. The nightmare scenario was that those parties were going to unite and cause a real big headache for Netanyahu. But you know the reason why they didn't unite? The reason why is because Naftali Bennett wanted to be the head and Gideon Sa'ar wanted to be the head, and they could not work out their differences. They could not come to some type of an agreement. So they ended up running separately. Gideon Sa'ar is polling around 12 to 13 seats, Naftali Bennett 11 to 12 seats. So all of these people who are really anti-Netanyahu, they have simply just their individuals as such, and their power, their strength is simply not enough by itself to topple Netanyahu. And what's more is Yair Lapid, for this election, he went to a great deal of work behind the scenes to bring about a merger of the center left. Again, that failed. Ofer Shelach from the political left, he wanted to bring him in. That was the guy who broke away from his own political party. Others, Avi Nissenkorn was somebody who was against joining this left party, etc. Ron Hudai is how you pronounce it, actually. Tel Aviv Mayor Ron Hudai. Again, he did not want to be part of a whole bloc. They wanted to be by themselves. So let's move on. The Labour Party, remember them? Yep, they were in power for many, many years. The last time the Labour Party led a coalition was actually 20 years ago. It was led by Ehud Barak. He was in charge. He actually beat Netanyahu in 1999. He was in charge for just over a year. It was at the time of many suicide bombings all over the place. Myself, as a resident in the city center of Jerusalem, as it started to increase, some of the suicide bombings were 2-3 successful ones per week. A very bad time. We lost a lot of people. I myself survived 3 suicide bombings. Generally, the Israeli public have moved over to the right. I think it's fair to say. And the left has simply just disappeared. One of the reasons suggested for this is that they haven't forgiven the politicians on the left for the disastrous Oslo Accords. Now, this discussion is not really not to go into that, but whatever happens, the right is going to win at least 80 seats. It's true, they can't get on with each other. It's a real big problem. The right can't work with each other. And many of the parties can't stand Netanyahu, or Netanyahu's got a problem with somebody else. The Netanyahu's also got his satellite parties, the 2 religious parties. They won't sit with Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid won't sit with them. Lieberman won't sit with the religious parties. That is why we are having the 4th election in 2 years. And if the numbers are correct, if the poll numbers are correct, that means we are heading to a 5th election, because right now it's a stalemate. Let's talk about the Labour Party. They have a new leader. It's the only woman who leads a political party in Israel. Well, a political party that is actually going to cross the minimum threshold of 3.25%. Her name is Merav Michaeli. She won the Labour Party from Amir Peretz. Amir Peretz was the man who led the Labour Party after the last election. He said he would never go into the government with Bibi, and of course he did. And the Labour Party fell apart. It literally disappeared. Merav Michaeli was somebody who was sitting in the Knesset by herself. She ran for the leadership. She got the support, and Ron Hudai from Tel Aviv, the Tel Aviv mayor, has also backed her. Ehud Barak, I believe, has also come out and supported her. Ehud Olmert, remember him, former prime minister. He says that she is the only challenger to Netanyahu. Make of that as you will. He wrote a column, an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post, and quite fascinating. And it looks like, amazingly, she is not only going to cross the threshold, but actually attain 6 seats. So the Labour Party are back in the Knesset, it seems, at this point, with 6 Knesset seats. Of course, that's a far cry from, let me see now, from 92, where I think the Labour Party under Yitzhak Rabin, taken over from Yitzhak Shamir at the time, got 46 seats. 40 seats minus. But still, it's good to see the Labour Party back in the Knesset. And the other party is the far left Meretz party. Nitzan Horowitz is the leader. Again, they should have merged with the Labour Party. Meretz claimed Labour didn't really want a merger. The Labour Party claimed Meretz didn't really want the merger. And basically, they're running separately. And Meretz is probably, some polls have shown that it's coming in below 3.25% and may not get into the Knesset. So that's a look at some of the parties which are fighting against one another. Now, let's look a little bit back at the history. If you're still with me, if I haven't bored you to tears just yet, the very first general election in Israel happened back in 1949 after the War of Independence. That campaign was mostly between the left and the right. And of course, the left won many, many times, right up until 1977, when Menachem Begin came to power. That all changed. In April 2019, there was no left or right anymore in Israeli politics. It was literally those who are for Bibi, those who are anti-Bibi. The Blue and White Party was anti-Bibi. It refused to sit with Netanyahu no matter what. In the end, Benny Gantz did. He broke away his faction and other people joined, and then people who were with Benny Gantz's faction didn't like it and they moved back to Yesh Atid. It was all very confusing. And he claimed, look, we can't keep having, and I think it was the right decision, by the way. If you want to know my opinion, after the third election, costing the country billions of shekels, when unemployment was going up, almost 1 million, and remember, the population is 9.3 million, 20% unemployed, people losing their jobs, people having difficulty in eating, feeding their families. And the Knesset just say, you know, we're not going to work with this party. I'm not working with him. Oh, no way. We said we were not going to sit with him. We're not going to sit with him. And they have another election and another election. And meanwhile, the problems are not going away. And COVID was the reason why Benny Gantz made the decision to say, let's sit in a government led by Netanyahu. And he got a lot of concessions. He got 15 ministers out of it, which was, and a couple of chairmanships on the Knesset committee, which is quite powerful. So he did very well out of it. But of course, there was agreement between both the Likud and the Blue and White. Benny Gantz managed to keep the name Blue and White. And it's fair to say that both sides broke the agreement. And I always said there was always going to be an election because, well, for various reasons, the ideology was just so different from each other. As I said, you have to go back 20 years to find the last Labour-led government, which was in the year 2000. And then, of course, Ariel Sharon took over from Ehud Barak. And I mentioned to you about, in some circles, the left is still blamed for the aftermath of the Oslo Accords. What's interesting is that after the left, after the Labour Party disappeared in Israeli elections, came along a party called Kadima. Remember them? Kadima meaning go forward, led by Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon broke away. He was one of the founders of the Likud party in the early 1970s, along with David Levy and, of course, Menachem Begin and various other people. It was a merger of many different parties, including the main Liberal Party at that time. and the Herut party, which was led by Menachem Begin, and there was 2 or 3 other very small parties. So Ariel Sharon was one of the founders of the Likud party, but it was becoming difficult by some of the more right-wing people within the Likud party who were totally opposed to the Hitznakut, which is the disengagement from Gaza, well, actually the Gush Katif area. A lot of people say that the settlements were removed from Gaza in 2005. That's actually factually incorrect. Israel pulled out of Gaza in 1993 under the Oslo Accords, 1993. The Gush Katif areas, which is actually the buffer zone. So it's literally on the border of Gaza and Israel. In other words, before 1967, Egyptian troops were inside of Gaza. Then you had Israelis at that part where it starts the Negev desert, and the bit in the middle was no man's land. That was just the buffer zone as such. That's where Gush Katif, the 21 Jewish settlements, Jewish communities were set up all along there. I remember working in Euronews around 2000, and a French journalist came over to me and said, "James, I just don't understand it. I remember the Oslo Accords, and I remember that Israel pulled out of Gaza. So when we're talking about the Israeli settlements in Gaza, what does it mean?" Finally, a journalist asks a legitimate question. And I said, I got a bit of paper. It was a bit of paper like this. And I just said, look, this is Gaza. I don't know if you can see that, probably not on this, but I said, this is, you're going to lose my face. Let me try and do it through words. This is Gaza. I drew a picture of Gaza. And then I did dots outside of Gaza to say that's where the Jewish settlements were. And then this side was Israel. So basically it was the buffer. Again, I think we've got that now. So, the French journalist, now I get it. I don't know how she went on air with explaining that, but proof positive is that a lot of journalists don't quite understand when it comes to the Middle East, what they're talking about. And when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians and the conflict, don't understand the legalities, and they repeat things that they've heard from others, colleagues, other networks, and it's a problem because it can be misleading, but it is the way it is. Anyhow, that was Gush Katif, and as I started drawing the settlements, I forgot what subject we were on right now, but blue and white. So we talked about Kadima. Kadima disappeared. Kadima was the opposition party, remember, led by Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon, of course, had that famous stroke. He had a second stroke. In fact, I still remember this day when he was put in the ambulance. It was reshown many times on Israeli television. Channel 2 it was at the time. It's now called Channel 12. Ariel Sharon was sitting up at the back of the ambulance. A camera zoomed in on him, a TV network. And then the next thing we knew, he wasn't very well in hospital, and he was in a stroke for several years before he finally passed away. His number 2, his trusted person, was Ehud Olmert, and he obviously became the number 1, and he won the election in 2006, and the Likud party at that time ended up with 12 seats. Netanyahu took back control of the party, and it was a big blow for the Likud party. There was some candidates that ran against Silvan Shalom, I remember, was one of those names, ran against Netanyahu. Netanyahu still won, and he managed to maintain the leadership of the Likud party. So Labour was an opposition to the right, no more. Kadima was an opposition, no more. By the way, when Shaul Mofaz took over, he had 28 seats. In the 2005 election, it went down. Was it the 2005 election or the 2000? I think it was the 2009 election. Those 28 seats went down to 2 seats. Kadima, obviously, after that, disappeared completely. Then came along what was known as the Zionist camp. It was really the Labour Party, but they changed their name. And I remember Netanyahu and people in the Likud party made a joke to say the Labour Party are changing their name, hoping that the electorate will not know it's really the Labour Party, but with a different name. But it was called the Zionist Camp, Machaneh Tzioni, and it had Tzipi Livni's party, Hatnuah, was part of that list. And it was actually, the poll showed for the 2015 election that the Likud party and the Machaneh Tzioni were actually neck and neck. And I remember being out one of the media centers that night in Jerusalem, or perhaps at one of the camps, going back to bed, waking up at 7 o'clock, turning on the telly, and I looked down on Channel 2 News, I think it was at the time. Since then it's become Channel 12, very confusing, but we won't go into that. And I looked down at where, you know, the blips going right across. And as they were going right across, I could not believe what I was looking at. That Likud party had gone 6 or 7 seats in front of this Zionist camp. Herzog, Isaac Herzog, who was leading, he soon left the party. And then it went into a free fall of internal infighting, et cetera, which is how the Labour Party pretty much disappeared. Next really came along Yesh Atid. Now, Yesh Atid was a party that suddenly appeared in 2013, and it suddenly got 19 seats. Came from nowhere, 19 seats. Yair Lapid, for some of you who may know, came from the telly. He was a television presenter, quite a good one, actually. Great appearance. All the girls loved him because, well, maybe not all the girls. Some of the women quite liked him because he was a good-looking chap and still is. And he dressed well and he was very articulate, very good in English, very good in Hebrew. And he got 19 seats, unprecedented. He joined the government with Netanyahu in 2013 it was. And the only major post, senior ministry that was available at that time, because the foreign ministry had already gone, and the interior ministry had already gone, and the defense ministry had already gone. So Yair Lapid, in charge of a major party with 19 seats, obviously wants a senior post. The only one available was the finance minister. And he accepted it. And I was surprised he accepted it. I didn't think his speciality lay with finance, or indeed it lay with economics. But who was I to suggest anything or to make a comment? As time went on.
James, sorry, we actually got a question. Would you like to have a minute's break?
We're doing the questions now? Okay, all right. I'll go with the format of Edgeware United.
Yeah, for the format. Okay. This is actually from Stuart Brodkin. And he says, if there's so many parties won't have Netanyahu as prime minister and therefore won't support him, how will Netanyahu win over 61 seats?
Well, I was going to come onto the polls, as you would expect me to come onto the polls. Anyway, we can talk about the polls right now. It's difficult to do this because, of course, that you look into the camera. It's a bit like doing telly, but you can't actually gauge the audience because how many people do we have watching this evening, David?
We've got over 50, haven't we? 48.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can, if you would prefer to go for a couple of questions from the audience, we can see if we can deal with that. If that's okay, then David.
Yeah, or would you prefer to carry on? I mean,
no, it's okay. Let's go with that. You're the boss. You're the driver.
You should enjoy the mathematics of Edgeware when David said over 50, 48.
Okay. There's hope that we might actually reach that number of 50. I think that's what Netanyahu's also.
There is another question here: is what about? Oh, sorry, you haven't answered the last one. Okay.
No, I can do the politician thing and just write them all down, and then we just do all 3 or 4. But however you wish to do this, because I'm the new boy in the class over here, so I haven't sat in for some of these. So I believe
whatever you're comfortable with.
That first question was related to how, if we're talking about Netanyahu being ahead in the polls, which of course I started off by speaking about that, and doing this from memory because I'm pretty good with the polls because I'm just fascinated by the subject. Netanyahu, in fact, actually, this brings me on to maybe it's a good way for me to sink this in. Tonight, Israel Television released, and I heard it on the main public broadcaster called Khan, Channel 11. A poll of polls. And basically, that is 3 or 4 polls which compile the numbers, surveys, and they've been pretty consistent over the last few weeks. And so what they do is they take the average number of each of those polls, in other words, 3 or 4 of those polls, a couple of the newspapers, one of the radio stations, 103 FM, and also one of the news stations, and they give a number. That poll of polls tonight put the Likud party on 29 seats, with Yesh Atid at 18 seats. So as you can see, there's 11 seat difference. Basically, the coalition will work something like this. Netanyahu is looking for support, and he has it right now, from the 2 religious parties. One of them is called United Torah Judaism, in Hebrew, Yahadut HaTorah. It's made up of 2 factions, Degel HaTorah and Agudat Yisrael, or if you're from Stamford Hill, Agudas Yisrael. And United Torah Judaism is the party that has 7 seats. It may get to 8. And Shas is the party that has 9 seats. It's polling at 8, so it may maintain and hang on to those 9 seats. You're talking about, let's say, 15, approximately 15. Netanyahu's 30 plus 15 is 45. Then you've got a party at the bottom. It's a breakaway from Bayit Yehudi, the old Mafdal, the National Religious Party. This party is called the Religious Zionists in English. It's led by somebody called, his name has just escaped me, Smotrich, Betzalel Smotrich. And he has joined up with the far right party in order for those parties to cross the minimum threshold. The far right party is, of course, led, they say, the old followers of Meir Kahane. That party is polling at 4 seats. 1 or 2 of the polls have it at 5 seats. Netanyahu will bring in Smotrich because Netanyahu can work very easily with Smotrich. And Smotrich is also inexperienced when it comes to politics. So Netanyahu is quite happy like that. Netanyahu doesn't get on with Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett doesn't like Netanyahu. Has told him to go many, many times. The clever thing about Naftali Bennett is that he has not declared he will not sit in a government with Bibi Netanyahu. And I think that's very smart, because all those in the past that have declared that they will not sit in a government with Netanyahu have ended up sitting in a government with Netanyahu. Now, I can go back for the last 10 years, 12 years since Netanyahu has come to power. Tzipi Livni in 2009 said that she would not sit with Netanyahu. She ended up sitting with Netanyahu. The one who took over, Kadima, Shaul Mofaz, he said he would not sit with Netanyahu. He too ended up sitting with Netanyahu. Then you had, who else said this? Avigdor Lieberman said he would not sit with Netanyahu. Guess what? He ended up joining. He demanded the defense ministry, Minister of Defense, which is why I spoke earlier on about how Netanyahu got rid of Moshe Ya'alon. And he was furious, and he stormed out, and he left the party and vowed to become prime minister and knock out Netanyahu. And he ended up disappearing because he just didn't have the support. Lieberman came in. When Lieberman felt it was right for him to become a minister, he joined. But he said he would not sit with Netanyahu. Let's see who else. Isaac Herzog. Isaac Herzog was somebody, I mentioned him earlier on. He was leading the party called the Zionist Camp. He was the one who got 24 seats in the 2015 election. He also said he would not sit with Netanyahu. He almost did. He almost did. There was talks going on. They got out. They were leaked. It was into the press. Labour colleagues turned on him, and he backed off. The same thing for the one who actually ended up taking over in the Labour Party. I've forgotten his name right now. Somebody else who said he would not sit with Netanyahu was Amir Peretz. He did so twice. Benny Gantz is not unique when he said he would not sit with Netanyahu and ended up sitting with him. He also cracked. He didn't do it just because he was weak, although I don't think he's a particularly good politician because he's got no experience in being a politician. He did it because he saw that the country could not have or keep having another election. It was crazy. The people were laughing over this. And the COVID situation, the unemployment rising, as I said earlier, I think he did the right thing. But as a result, right now, his blue and white party is polling at 4 seats. It may not cross the minimum threshold. But at the time, I believe he did the right thing. So we're looking at, I mentioned Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett is somebody who would join the Netanyahu government with his 11, maybe 12 seats. In fact, I was just speaking with one of his people this morning about what they plan to do. And I made a little joke to say, we're going for a 5th election based on these numbers. And he said, James, don't joke. It's costing the country billions. I said, well, what are you going to do? Your numbers don't add up. And he said to me, we're trying to get another 3 or 4 seats. Okay. So if they get another 3 or 4 seats, they'd be over that magic number of 61. Remember, the magic number is 61 of the 120-seat Knesset. And if you don't get that, and by the way, this poll of polls tonight, which actually the news networks, and the one which I was listening to was Khan, was focusing on the fact that Netanyahu is going to fall. And you might see this for those of you who read some of the English Israeli press, the Times of Israel, for example, or the J-Post. You might see this. It actually read the anti-Bibi camp had 61 and the pro-Bibi camp had 59. That means they can form a government. But in reality, if you look at the real numbers, there is no way that Gideon Sa'ar, a party from the right, his party called New Hope, is going to sit in a coalition with the far left Meretz party. It's safe to say it's almost impossible. I don't want to say impossible because that would be arrogant of me. And also, Gideon Sa'ar is not going to sit with the joint list. The joint list is the Arab party. 3 factions. One of them is the Ballad party, radical anti-Israel party. It hates Israel. It's talked about another intifada. It's had so many radical candidates. Azmi Bashara was one of them. I'm going a little bit off topic right now, but Azmi Bashara was one of them. He was on the phone. He fled Israel. He was a member of Knesset with diplomatic immunity with the Ballad party a few years back. He was on the phone to the chief generals of Hezbollah, and this has been proven, directing the missiles when the Hezbollah was firing at Israel. A little bit more northeast, you'll catch that village. You'll catch that Jewish community. He was caught. He ran. He left the country. Strange thing is, his wife and family were on benefits up to 3 years afterwards before somebody raised it in the news. Despite the fact that Azmi Bashara, a member of Knesset from the Ballad party, was on the side of Hezbollah trying to destroy Israel. That's how radical it is. Now, can you really see Gideon Sa'ar sitting in a party with Ballad? It's preposterous. So if those are the numbers, we're heading to a 5th election in October. Next.
Well, we've actually got quite a lot of questions. So
I figured that's why I paused.
Okay. I'd like to ask you a question, actually, before we go on to everybody else. And it's always something that's really bugged me. America has got 350 million people, odd, with two main parties. Israel has got 10 million people with 39 parties. Isn't it about time? I mean, and it's absolute chaos there. Every year it's complete chaos, and everyone's telling me that you know, Knesset and so on, it can never do things they really want to do, and so on and so on and so on. So isn't there a way, and not getting down to two, but I mean into a workable amount of parties?
Mm. So there are 39 parties running in this election. As we said, many of them are not going to cross the minimum threshold. One of the reasons is that parties do not like to work with other parties. Everyone wants to be the leader. Almost everyone has got an ego. People can't get on with their colleagues. I mean, for example, in the UK, there are conservative factions within the Conservative Party. And somebody might vehemently disagree with his colleague, but they don't just suddenly storm out and start a new political party, because that's not the way the system works in this country, and it probably wouldn't get very, very far. I can tell you that 39 political parties is not so high. That is, if you look back to the April 2019 election, there were 47 parties running at that time. And remember, Blue and White was the party that actually merged, and it actually contained 4 different parties or 4 different factions within that political party. So you had that plus 46 other registered parties. Now, it's true to say that 2 or 3 of them actually dropped out just before the actual election date, but still you had 45 parties running. So this is just a mere 39 parties. Let's talk very briefly, and I'll make this brief, because if you say you have lots of questions, we'll try and go through some of the questions. But I was a campaigner in the 90s and in the early noughties in Israel for election reform. Now, I believe that the proportional representation system works well. Not sure it should be taken in the UK, because I think that would be problematic. But let's focus on Israel. And the reason I say is PR works well in Israel is because that you have so many different factions within Israel. By the way, it's not quite 10 million citizens. It's 9.3 is the official number of Israeli citizens in Israel today. And those are official numbers from the Interior Ministry, which are released twice a year. So the number is always going up, but it's gone to 9.3, which is quite a lot considering where we were in 1949 with just 600,000. So that's quite a lot. But why and many other people, it's not just me, but I've looked at this very carefully. I mean, I haven't visited it for several years, but I can pretty much remember what it was on my mind. And that is that there needs to be what we call constituencies. In America, they're called districts. You need to have candidates standing in certain areas. And every time an election comes round, they go canvassing. I've done it many times myself in the UK. If not for myself, because I was once standing as a member for the House of Commons in the 97 election. Don't ask me which political party, because I've forgotten now anyway, it's so long ago. But it's tough. And, you know, every day you pick a new road and you speak to people and you have to take that abuse. And sometimes you get a handshake, or you have to kiss a baby or something like that. No, that's not ridiculous. You have to stroke a dog or something, but you're looking for votes. And I think I did it twice for councillor as well. And it's not easy in the rain, in the hot sunshine, in the snow, pouring rain, when you're writing down some notes. No one has ever done that in Israel. They couldn't care less about that. There's no such thing as districts. When you can't get your kids into the local school, or you've got issues with regard to a company, one of the main companies, there's no one to talk to. You speak to the Department of Transportation because the taxi driver stole money from you, then they put you on to somebody else. Nobody takes it. It's not the country. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking the land of Israel. I'm not knocking Israel, which we all love. I'm knocking the system. the system needs to be reformed. But once you're in it, if you're all fighting against each other and it's all about control of your turf, it's a little bit like gangs on the streets of LA. I lived in LA for 3 years. When you're so focused on your bit of control, you sometimes forget about the overall long distance objective and focus. You know, it's just occurred to me that Tony Blair once said, as when he was leader of the opposition against John Major, that he would campaign, if he became prime minister, he would actually introduce a law to bring proportional representation into the UK. When he became prime minister in 97, and again in 2001, and again in 2005, did he do that? No. Why? Because the system worked for him. You don't want to knock a system that is going to not work for you. And so then it became the Lib Dems who were campaigning for it because it was going to work for the Lib Dems, but the Labour were very happy about it. And the Conservatives were quite happy to sit out because they knew eventually they'd get back into power, which they did in 2010 in the coalition. In Israel, you don't have, as I said, these districts. If there was a way to mark out districts, 120 of them. Now, let me just tell you, the argument against that is, where do we mark them? Of course, everyone agrees Tel Aviv and Netanya and Ashkelon, Ashdod. But what about areas of Jerusalem? What would the international community say if you started lining areas of Area C in Judea and Samaria? You know, 4 or 5 candidates running in Gush Etzion block, or the Kidumim block, or Ma'alei Adumim, which is seen by some in the international community as occupied Palestinian territory. So some have said that to me in opposition to doing this. So another argument has come back to say, well, we could have half and half. Okay. Another aspect is raising the minimum threshold. It was at one time 1%. It went up to 1.5%, 2%, got to 2.25. Then we campaigned to bring up to 5%. It might stop the smaller parties running. In the end, there was a negotiation, and there was some horse trading, and there was a couple of deals, and you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. And in the end, it was agreed 3.25. As a result, the 4 Arab parties merged together to become the 3rd largest party in Israeli politics. Their ideology is here's something you can learn from the Arabs. The ideology of those 4 political, and I saw actually something just flash up on my screen about 10 minutes ago about the Arab parties. 4 factions, actually now there's 3 because one of them dropped out, but let me just tell you about the 4 factions. One of them is Hadash. It's the Communist Party. It was originally started by Jews. Those early secular Zionists who believed very much in Joseph Stalin was the savior, and somebody sent me last week a picture of a parade in Tel Aviv of the big picture of Joseph Stalin and the red flags and everything like that. That was from 1951. Wow. I guess they never got the memo how many people were killed. They were Israelis. That's pretty frightening. But that's Hadash party is mostly run by the Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, of course. And by the way, it's just under 1.8 that have voting rights in Israel. In other words, Israeli citizens. So yeah, just actually it's about 1.8 million. So one of them is Hadash. The other party is Ra'am. Ra'am is led by Mansour Abbas, somebody who I've actually got quite a lot of respect for. And the reason is that's the Islamic party. So they're very strict Islam and very critical of Israel. So you're wondering why am I saying I've got respect for him. He has broken away from the other faction, which is called Joint List. And the reason why he broke away is because he said, this is crazy. We don't align with the left in Israel. We don't align with the right, but the right are always in power. The right have been in power under Netanyahu for the last 12 years. In the Arab areas, and I agree with this, by the way, in the Arab areas, there is so much Arab violence, Arabs against Arabs. There's at least 100 Arabs killed every single year through the gang violence, through the mafia, through the crime. I mean, Many people have got guns. It's just terrible. It's been making quite a lot of news in Israel over the last few weeks. Ra'am broke away from the joint list to run by itself. Unfortunately, it may not cross the minimum threshold of 3.25%. It says it doesn't matter if the left get in or the right get in. Let's work with whichever government it is. Let's be clever. Let's get money from the government and we can pump it into our communities and create infrastructure and jobs. And we can create a new security establishment to clamp down on the crime and work with the Israelis, not go against them all the time, not always oppose them. Let's work together. We live in this country together. That makes sense to me. And Mansour Abbas couldn't get the agreement from the other three parties. The other party is Ta'al, also kind of a religious party, and the other party is Balad, the secular but radical nationalist party, the party I mentioned earlier on. So that's the four of those parties were together. There's now three, but the four of those parties were together. They agree on absolutely nothing, except they hate Netanyahu. They agree on absolute nothing, except they don't particularly like Israel. They certainly don't want it as a Jewish state. They just want it as Israel, one big country for Arabs and Israelis, and we should all get involved. We can learn from that, but we don't learn. Our problem is that we have a disagreement. I might just have a slight disagreement with David Landau, or David Collier. And I said, right, that's it. I'm leaving. I'm starting my own political party. I'm taking over these talks live on Wednesday. Next Wednesday is going to be me. I'm going to be chairman. Come on. Let's sit down. Let's have a cup of coffee. Let's talk about it. Let's agree where we can agree and disagree. And let's see, maybe we agree 60, 70%. The problem in Israeli politics is we've gone past that. We don't do that anymore. So there needs to be electoral reform. So once again, I say districts, raising the minimum threshold to say 5%. Some of these small parties will still run, by the way, because they've got the backing, the financial backing. And also as well, that we need to learn to work together. David.
We could have that discussion about you wishing to become chairman later, after this is all over. But just wonder, you talk about the number of people who are anti-Netanyahu or pro-Netanyahu. Just wonder, who do you think would be the ideal prime minister who Joe Biden would like?
Well, obviously, he would like to get rid of Netanyahu. I don't think there's any secrecy in that. I say obviously because the Democrats have, certainly under Obama, worked very much, had a lot of problems. You know, I'm just hesitating on this because I do recall, and this is official, in the 1999 election. So Netanyahu became prime minister for the first time in 1996. 1999 was another election, and Ehud Barak managed to get hold of the Labour Party, headed up the Labour Party, and he was running. Bill Clinton was American president. He openly declared his support for Barak. He sent his political consultants and strategists over to Israel to work with Barak, and he did everything possible to get Netanyahu out of power. The Democrats feel more allied with the political left in Israel because they say, and Joe Biden has already said this, or through the words of the Secretary of State, Blinken, he said, the two-state solution, we must push forward for the two-state solution. Now, one of the things that Donald Trump recognized through his people around him was the two-state solution is gone, that there's no way to work this out. I mean, Abbas hasn't even come to the table for the last 8 years, and he won't come to the table. So that's, I mean, you're talking about something right now in the clouds. I mean, first you want to talk about reconciliation at least, or at least bringing two parties together. And I don't know how Biden is going to do that.
Okay, we've got a we have got one from our Rabbi Lister, who asked me to ask a question. I mean, it's slightly of a tangent, but he said, is it possible to have a rapprochement between religious and secular communities in Israel?
I missed that first word. Is it possible to have a what?
Rapprochement.
Rapprochement.
Rapprochement. Rapprochement is like peace, I suppose.
Again, a reconciliation.
Yeah.
It's a good question, Rabbi Lister, and it's not one. It certainly can't be answered as a yes or no. There are great divides, and some of the behavior from a small, as you know, a small section of what we call the strictly Orthodox. Some people say the word ultra-Orthodox. I don't like that term. And because we don't hear of the ultra-Catholics or the ultra-Muslims, but the ultra-Orthodox Jews we hear about. And I think it's a wrong term. Some of them, by the way, I know also say it when they speak in English and they're trying to explain something, you talk to the audience. So they use the word us ultra-Orthodox, but I don't like that term. Strictly Orthodox, Haredi, or something like that, maybe. The behavior of a small section has been atrocious, of which the rabbis have condemned. But of course, the focus is always on that small section, not the majority. The other problem is because they all dress the same. There's a uniform. The uniform is exactly the same. Black trousers, black jacket, white shirt, a hat, and maybe a beard, actually normally a beard. And depending upon which follower, Hasidish, or whether you're a Litvak, or whether you're something else, Brisk, or one of the other groups, you may have Payas. The problem is that it does seem to be, and I think falsely, that the battle is between the religious and the right, i.e. Netanyahu, Likud, Shas, Yahadut HaTorah, United Torah Judaism, and the secular left, which is made up of Yair Lapid, of Labour, of Meretz, and believe it or not, of Avigdor Lieberman today, who was on the right, but he openly declares his party is going to be a secular party. It's against the religious, can't have the religious interfering with politics, let them do their own thing. And anyone who wants to be with the Bati Din, the Beit Din, the Jewish courts, then let them be with it. But we need to have our own society, and anyone can have non-kosher food, and it shouldn't be made compulsory in the hotels and in other places. And this is a big divide today. And as I said, a small section of the religious community behave in a very bad way. And for those who might be interested, and again, it's hard to do this because I can't really see anyone except David, and maybe one or two other people, but there is a faction. When you see these, if for anyone who keeps in touch with Israeli news, there is some of them are on the streets, blocking in Jerusalem and in Bnei Brak, and now in Ashdod. There's a faction. It's called Peleg Yerushalayim, Jerusalem faction. This is a radical faction. It's a minority. Actually, they started a political party in 2015, but it didn't go very far. And believe it or not, I actually live next door to the leader, or one of the leaders of the faction, Reb Shmuel Orbach, who's now passed away, and or a few doors away. And I used to talk to him quite a lot. These are the ones who you see throwing stones, blocking roads, anti the army, behaving in a disgusting way in certain areas in Mea Shearim, for example. If occasionally, I say occasionally because there are IDF people who go through there all the time. I mean, you know, every hour on the hour. But sometimes the press have highlighted cases whereby an IDF soldier has been set upon. This is part of it is Peleg, but it's a minority. And the problem is that you see that, oh, look, I recognize them. He's the guy with the beard. Yeah, he's got the hat. The ultra-orthodox, they're crazy. We've got to get rid of them. We've got to get rid of them. I spend so much time in trying to explain, no, this is, I mean, the Turikata, they look exactly the same. The Turikata is a cult. I mean, it marches with Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It flies every year at the expense of Iran to Tehran to be present at the no such thing as a Holocaust conference, yearly conference. Their head, who's based in New York, YouTube, unfortunately, they've got a responsibility to take it down. There was a video of their head, Avi Wise, speaking directly to a camera. I mean, I had it on my YouTube channel, but YouTube took it down, speaking directly to say the Holocaust never happened. The Zionists made it up. It never happened. They conned the world. The Zionists made it up. There's a guy with he's got one of these big furry hats on, not a Strymor, because it was during the week. For those who don't know, you wear a Strymor on a Simcha, on a Chag, on a Shabbos. And he's got his long, big black capoto, his long coat. And he's saying, I can't believe it. They're not the same as Ger, or Vishnitz, or Belz, or Bobov, or Sadi Ger, who I know very well. Actually, I live next door to the Rebbe. They outcast them. The problem is they all look alike. And those who are not in the community don't understand that. So it's a bit of a long answer. I'm sorry, Rabbi Lister, but I have to say that it's going to take a lot of work for us to build those bridges. Bridges need to be built. I wish we could do something about it. I encourage those people within the religious communities learning in Kollel to sometimes come out and to mix in with the secular. And we talk to them so they can see that, you know, we're not as balmy as what we claim to be, but it's going to take a lot of work.
Okay, I'll try and remember some of that to pass back to him. I've got that one from Victor Huglin of Liverpool International. If Netanyahu forms a government and is then sent to jail, who takes over as PM?
Right. So, hello, Victor. So, for those who don't know, there are 3 indictments against Netanyahu. The indictments are, by the way, I wrote a story about this a few years back. Since he has become prime minister in 1996, I think there was a total of like 32 indictments against him. They weren't actually pushed forward, but the police always claimed that they had things against him. The establishment doesn't like Netanyahu. I'm not taking sides over here. I'm not telling you who I voted for in the past. That's neither here nor there. But I can tell you that Channel 11 is an anti-Netanyahu network. Channel 12 News is an anti-Netanyahu network. Channel 13 loathes the man, hates everything. It's like everything is like anything that you can take from Netanyahu, it's anti-Netanyahu. Channel 20 is more pro-Netanyahu. The newspapers, Times of Israel wants Netanyahu gone. Jerusalem Post wants Netanyahu gone. Mariv wants him gone. Yediot wants him gone. Yisrael Hayom, Israel Today, is a pro-Netanyahu. It's a minority. And yet still, the establishment and part of the people are so frustrated. They cannot understand why people keep voting for the Likud party. It's still 10 seats ahead of every other party. They cannot understand it. What they say is, the people say, hey, Channel 13, you're not going to tell us who to vote for. We decide who we're going to vote for. Yeah, we're not going to be influenced by the media. We decide who we're going to vote for. And I think that's fair enough. If Netanyahu loses by 5 seats or 10 seats, or we can't put a majority together, a coalition, and the other parties do, then that's it. He's lost. It's bye-bye Bibi. But if he can do it, and the people have voted fairly, in a democratic election, which I have always been a campaigner for democracy all over the world, then we have to be able to accept it. And instead of boo-hooing it all the time, then the opposition should put together a proper opposition with policies and focus on the next election, when hopefully it will be in 4 years' time, rather than just complaining all the time on Netanyahu. There are 3 indictments against him. To move to the question, Victor, there are 3 indictments. One of them is receiving very, very nice gifts, cigars and champagne. The second one is receiving favorable coverage in the media. He did a deal with the owner of the Yediot paper as well. Actually, he was the one who recorded the conversation. So I presume he was the one who passed it on to one of his colleagues, and it got leaked to And the third one is a little bit more complicated, involving the Walla news site, Bezik, and also a business deal that took place. The point is that people still vote for Netanyahu, despite the fact that there are 3 indictments against him. The court proceedings will start for the first appearance in court. I mean, he's been in court already just to plead not guilty to the charges, and then the process will start after the election. It's going to go on for a couple of years. So I think we're a long way away from worrying about if Netanyahu ends up in jail. But I do want to point out something. And again, I'm trying to be fair on this. Maybe some of you think that I'm not, but I am going to say, in the case with Ehud Olmert, because I've been asked this before, Ehud Olmert, former prime minister, headed Kadima, was a Likud man, ended up in jail. He was somebody who received envelopes of cash. And we know this because it came up in court, number one. And number two is, it was my neighbor in Jerusalem who was giving it to him. Yes, Moshe Talansky. He was my neighbor in Shaarei Chesed, in Rehavia area in Jerusalem. And he got into a lot of trouble because the authorities just didn't believe. He just believed he was the rising star in the Likud party, and he was trying to help him with his campaign, gave him money. They thought he was trying to buy questions or something. And he ended up in a lot of trouble himself, and his wife was very ill. He became very ill. It was very sad. But his number two, Tzipi Livni, told him, you have to resign, and went on to the news channels every evening and said, we don't accept him as leader. He's got to go. His number three, Shaul Mofaz, also said the same thing. He's got to go, Ehud Olmert. And eventually he did. And his secretary then came forward and admitted, yeah, I was the one who paid a lot of people. And she got a few years in jail as a plea bargain. Netanyahu, not one of his people that actually said, you should go. Not one. Not one I'm aware of. Maybe a member of the Likud party. I mean, there's about 250,000. But certainly not any of the MKs or not any of the prominent members. Now you could say, yeah, because they're too scared of him. Well, it's a democracy. You could come. Now, Gideon Saar ran against him, and he lost. He got less than 20% of the votes, and he stormed off and started his own political party. I think he's entitled to do that. He's a nice chap. He saw an opportunity. There's nothing wrong with having an opportunity in politics. He felt they would never get another opportunity. And people accept that. But you have to remember, people went up against Netanyahu for the leadership of the party, and he won outright. And again, I believe in democracy. So I think we're a long way from Netanyahu being in jail. But if he ended up in jail, there would be another election or something would change. We're a long way from that.
We're actually over time, but are you happy to carry on? Because I've still got a few more
okay.
questions.
Are we losing people? Is anyone still left?
We've lost about 5%, so it's not too bad. Right, the next one is from Johnny Ross. What about the influence of the Arab parties? Why won't that help anti-Netanyahu candidates defeat the right?
Yeah, so that was the question. Hello, Johnny, if you're still with us. I saw that question flash up. So I did mention about the Arab parties, the 4 factions. Ra'am have dropped out, so it's 3 factions. As a result of them dropping out, the Arab vote will go down. They did have 15 seats at one time, went down to 13 in the last election. Right now, they're polling 8 or 9 seats because Ra'am has dropped out, and they may not cross the threshold. I would like them to cross the threshold. I think that would be helpful because I think it might give support from outside the government on the basis of helping the Arab Israeli citizens and taking some money from the government like all the other parties do. So the joint list is the Arab faction, which of course normally goes with the left. But the problem is that the anti-Netanyahu parties, especially the ones on the right, will not want to vote with the Arab parties. So Gideon Saar, who says, by the way, Naftali Bennett's people are not convinced when Gideon Saar says he refuses to sit with Bibi, he refuses to sit with Bibi. Naftali Bennett's people told me, we're not convinced that when he says he's not going to sit with him, he's not going to sit with him, as we spoke earlier. I hope that answers that one.
Okay. Right. This is from somebody called Galaxy J5. I'm not quite sure who that is, but anyway.
It's probably not a name.
No, it's a bit strange because there's another, somebody answered this. I'll read it out anyway. Is there a natural heir to BB when he decides to leave politics? And I think that has been answered by Julian Sarney, and he said he just said Bezalel Smotrich.
Bezalel Smotrich, yes.
Yeah.
So
does that answer the first bit?
Oh, that's interesting. So I think what is being suggested, did we get a name there?
No, the name given that was when you were trying to remember somebody earlier on. That's why that name popped in.
Okay.
Which name?
Smotnich.
No, but that answers the question before that. That from Galaxy J5.
Well, let me jump in just for time reasons, and we can go through maybe a few other questions as well. Bezalel Smotrich is the leader of the religious Zionist party. He's a younger man. Netanyahu works with him. He works with Netanyahu, and obviously Netanyahu, the Likud party, wants them to get over the minimum threshold of 4 seats. And if that's the case, he will certainly get at least one ministry position, and he probably asked for 2. When I can't see, Netanyahu is not planning to leave for a long time. He likes his job. He's devoted his entire life to this job, to politics. Whether you like him or whether you loathe him, he has really given quite a lot of his life when he probably could have been quite successful in business. But he's one of the main, the longest, certainly I think it's the top 3 or the top 4 leaders in the world, the longest leader in the world. Hang on, that doesn't sound right. I've got things flashing up on my screen every time I speak, so sometimes it puts me off. He is, Angela Merkel, as I think is I'm talking about a Western country, obviously, not a dictatorship, but Angela Merkel has been there for many, many years, but she's stepping down very shortly. Netanyahu has been there for a long time. Putin has been there for a long time, and 1 or 2 other leaders. I mean, that's quite something through a democratic election box. That's really something. There was talk, in fact, actually about 10 years ago, I looked at all the candidates who were likely to go for a leadership election to head the Likud, and I came up with 12 leading names. Obviously, Sa'ar was one of them at the time, and he will probably come back to the Likud party. And there's also talk that Naftali Bennett will eventually join the Likud party once Netanyahu leaves. So he will also try and go for it. The Nir Barakat, who I thought was perhaps a future leader, he was the former Jerusalem mayor. He never got any ministry position. There wasn't one available for him as well. So he's been a little bit quiet recently. And there are several other names. Gilad Erdan, who was the ambassador now in America. He was also a name put forward. Let me see who else. Several names, but I think again we're some way from that.
Okay.
See if there's any yes or no questions that I can possibly answer, and just I'd like to
Jewish,
go through.
There's no such thing as yes or no answers. We've only got a couple of dozen left. Brenda Greenberg. Have the people demonstrating against Netanyahu every weekend had any effect?
Yes, Brenda, hello. Yes, so you've seen those pictures as well, and those videos every single Saturday night, Motzei Shabbos, in Balfour Street, outside the King's Hotel, and where the Prime Minister lives. And on the other side is residential blocks. I've got family, many friends who live around there. At one time, it was 4 nights per week. 4 nights per week that these people were there, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 until 11, 12, 1 o'clock, against area regulations, the local municipality. The police moved in several times. Some of them were violent. Some of them threw stones at the police. Some of them set fires. I believe very much a democracy is what's a democracy? The right to vote for any particular party that you wish to, the right for free speech, uncensored news, and the right to demonstrate peacefully. But when it becomes loud and you're making too much noise and you're waking up an entire residential area, it's wrong. And so many elderly people, some of those people have been very sick with COVID, but didn't go into hospital. And they can't rest. There's people who've got kids, and the noise of the loud halos, the speakers, the music blaring, the police are just trying to do their job and move in. The area, the municipality have really, they've given orders, paper orders. It's gone to the courts a few times. I spoke with the deputy mayor of Jerusalem a few weeks ago about this. They're waiting for another response from the court because, again, it's tied up in legalities and stuff. There's nothing wrong with having people outside, but when I mean, even some of the, believe it or not, some have said it's a bit horrible for me to say. I never thought I'd be saying this. Excrement on the roads, and it's that bad. The rubbish, the food, and everything left on the pavements. People can't walk by. It's a problem. So there's been a lockdown in Israel. Many restrictions in synagogues, with weddings, at the airport. Of course, the airport has been closed for a long time, but the demonstrations are allowed to continue. Why? Because if you shut them down, there'll be a massive uprising that's anti-democracy. So the government says, you know what, keep it going. And I think the question from Brenda was, has it helped anyone? It may have helped Netanyahu. It may have helped the Likud, because I know so many people in Israel who are anti-Netanyahu, but they cannot stand these people. They think they're nuts. They think that they're taking away votes from the left because they're behaving. So we're talking about 40,000. So that's equivalent to maybe 4 Knesset seats. You want to do that? Fine. That's a conservative number, by the way. You want to do that, but the chaos that you're causing for tens of thousands of residents in the area is wrong.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Right, we've got 3 left. So shall we can we do the last 3 and then go home? Is that okay? Okay. This is from Brian Klitzner. Are the Israeli population in general not infuriated with having so many elections in such a relatively short space of time? What can be achieved with such dissension in their ranks? Yes,
is the answer. And if you didn't hear that, yes, they are furious. They are angry. They don't understand it. And I don't know if you were with us earlier on. However, I mentioned there are major issues in Israel. Unemployment. People are dying of COVID. There's almost 6,000 people now dead of COVID. There's more than 50 young pregnant women in hospital, pregnant, I think I mentioned that, who are in very serious condition from COVID. And the numbers are horrendous. The unemployment rate is rising. People are really struggling. And as you know, Israel has a high cost of living. And especially in the big cities, it costs a lot of money. And it's difficult. And when they see the country having another election and another election, it makes them mad. It really does. Mad as in angry, the American word mad, not mad as in crazy, but they are going crazy. They are going mad over the situation. But it is what it is. And as I said earlier on, we might be heading to a 5th one. If those parties, and again, I think I'd like to just make this point because I was going to make it earlier on, but we jumped in with some questions, which I was happy to do. I just want to say something about Yair Lapid, which I think is very appropriate this time. And this may be helpful to Brian. It was Brian who asked the question, yes, David?
Yeah.
I think it was. I think it was Brian.
Yeah.
Yep, there you go. Yair Lapid, I mentioned this, which he was the finance minister in 2013. And he was ridiculed a little bit because some people in the finance ministry said he didn't really know what he was doing. Netanyahu certainly ridiculed him. Netanyahu was the finance minister under Ariel Sharon. And actually, when he became foreign minister after that. But Netanyahu was part of the process of kind of making a free market economy in those days. That's why he wanted to stay with Sharon as his minister. But when Yair Lapid won, I think, 11 seats. It was 11 seats in 2015. Yair Lapid could have gone into government. He could have been the foreign minister. A very articulate person, very well presented, looks really good, great image, great in English, great in Hebrew. I saw him once at the House of Commons in London. And I remember going into a room where we were sitting, doing a couple of interviews. And a girl came running out, it was a Jewish girl, and she was screaming, "Oh, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And the guy next to her said, "Don't worry, she's just seen Yair Lapid." Oh! In other words, he's a good-looking guy. So I looked at the guy going, okay, right. He could have gone into government. He could have been a really good foreign minister. He refused to work with Netanyahu. His pride was hurt. Netanyahu criticized him that he wasn't a good finance minister. He wouldn't go back. He just kept heading his party. And since 2015, where are we? We're 21 now, 6 years, almost 6 years. He is criticized, he is condemned, he's ridiculed Netanyahu. I mean, Netanyahu has also done the same back. So both of them have behaved like this. But Yair Lapid, in my view, should have gone into government. And he should have been able to take a minister position and shown the Israeli people what he was capable of doing. If he'd messed up the job, okay. So, you know, his party would go down in the ratings. And if he'd been successful, he might be a serious contender for prime minister today. But he chose not to do that. And I think that's a big problem. I think whatever the election result is, if Netanyahu does end up with 10 seats ahead, he should get the first opportunity to put together a coalition, and other parties, they should demand as much as they can get from it. But they should accept the fact that the Israeli people have voted for, well, more votes have gone to Netanyahu's Likud party than any other party, and just work together for each other. Pass a budget. There's not been a budget passed since 2016. For those who don't understand that, that means that a budget is done slightly different to the UK, but a budget is that it's how much money we've got in the current account, and the Ministry of Defense wants a few billion, and education wants a few billion, and transportation wants. So that has to be decided upon in the cabinet. Then you take it to the Knesset, you vote in the Knesset, and whoever is in government, you've obviously got at least 61 seats. It will pass in the Knesset. The opposition will automatically vote against it. You've got a budget. The reason why it was done in 2016 was done for 2 years, so the parties wouldn't have to squabble again at the end of 2017. Then we got to 2018, towards the end of 2018, and the parties decided, you know what, we could probably get a few more seats if we go to a general election. They decided not to vote for a budget. That's why there's always, almost always, a general election around March time, or in this case, April, just before Pesach. It doesn't happen very much in the middle of the year, because if a budget is not passed by the end of the year, in other words, December 31st, the Knesset automatically dissolves, government falls, go to elections. And the date changes depending upon how you work it out in terms of campaigns and when it was officially dissolved. So we need a government. David.
Yes, okay. Right, Julian Zani, there are lots of religious issues bubbling under the surface that will not go away, that involve the Supreme Court chipping away at the religious nature of the state. The draft comments in the public domain, conversions, etc. This also has a major bearing on what sort of coalition can and cannot be formed. Oh dear. Yes.
So I'm not clear on the question, Julian.
Did you get the question?
I'm not clear on the question, no. Can Julian ask it himself? Can he unmute himself?
Julian? Yeah, Julian, do you know how to do? Hold on, can I?
Okay, don't worry. So if David would just for time reasons, if David would, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. So maybe it's.
I'm unmuted. I'm unmuted.
Go ahead.
Hi, James.
Hello, Julian.
I remember the similar meeting we had in September a year and a half ago, and we're back again. I personally don't think that it's possible to form a government for the simple reason that there are so many of these issues bubbling away under the surface that are going to polarize the parties on the right and the religious parties against everyone else, apart from just their like or dislike of Bibi. Needed to deal with some of those issues. The religious parties are not going to let them drop. They're going to be a major part of any coalition agreement discussions, and that's simply going to polarize the left against the right and the religious, and make it impossible, in my opinion, to form any sort of stable coalition. Hence fifth elections. Right. That's what I was getting at.
Okay, so it's a bit complicated really in this late hour, but it's nice to talk to you again, Julian. And I do recall that you asked a question, and you got your head on with regard to the Israeli election, and you pretty much know what's going on over there. And you lived there for many years. You work, you pay taxes over there, so you know the state of affairs. I think that Israel, the Likud party, the way there's going to be a government it's Likud with the two religious parties, Naftali Bennett and the religious Zionist party. They need 61. They need to get a few more seats, otherwise it's a stalemate. And then I think if they can keep it stable for the next 4 years, then it's up to the opposition for there to be an opposition, a real opposition this time. In the days of the last century, where there was an official Labour Party as such, it doesn't have to be Labour, but it could be anyone, who come forward with specific policies of what they think should be the future of the state of Israel, where it's going, its direction. I mean, the whole dynamics and the geopolitics are changing across the Middle East, and it's difficult to keep up with it. And there are also some major issues with regard to security. Hezbollah is listening to a briefing a couple of weeks ago, more than 4,000 missiles pointed at Israel. In the next war, and they believe there's going to be a war, and it might be sooner rather than later, there will be, I think the number was something like about 50 or 60 missiles dropping down on Israel every single day. It'll be a war like no other war. That's pretty serious. You've got the Iranian problem. It's perhaps as well that Iran will encourage Hamas and Islamic Jihad to join in from Gaza. There are major, major issues which need to be dealt with. And unless you get these parties working together and putting their differences aside, and the religious work with the secular work with the religious, the left work with the right, and you come to some type of agreement. You might not agree on everything, but we are going to go for a fifth election, and then a sixth, and then a seventh, and an eighth, and a ninth, and you keep going on. That's how it is. It's good to speak to you, Julian. Can we just take the last one, David, before everyone leaves? Or the last two?
This is actually more of a statement, so you could get away with it easily.
Okay, maybe just...
sorry?
I was just going to say, if it's a statement, maybe we should leave the statement and just go to the last question then in that case. That
is the last thing.
Okay. All right.
It's from Flora Frank, who left London or Edgware about a year ago for 2 weeks, and she's still there. So I can't not bring her in.
Okay. And Flora Frank is a very well-known name from Edgware.
Very well known. Very well.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll introduce you if she ever comes back. Right. What she's saying is, for what it's worth, Ehud Olmert lives directly opposite me. I assume that's in Jerusalem. Netanyahu is a good, strong leader for Israel. I'm still not sure for who to vote for. This is the problem here in Israel.
Oh, good question. David, you said it was a statement. It's not. It's actually a very interesting question. So let me just, for anyone who's still with us right now, I can see Morris is with us, and he's wherever he is, the sun is still up, so that's great. He's got a picture behind him with the blue sky and trees. Flora asks a really good question, because it's a problem that I have had, and actually just reminds me I forgot to bring in a couple of slides, but that's okay for another time. If I haven't bored everyone, perhaps another time. But I vote in Israel. I'm not voting this time because I'm outside of the country. And Israel works that you have to not just be in Israel, but you have to live in Israel. You have to have an official address in Israel. You have to be working in Israel, and you have to be paying local taxes. You can't just visit there, because that's not the way the system works. They want voters who actually live in Israel, which is might surprise some of you. A lot of people, it's around 20% of people, are undecided as to who to vote for. And I can't tell you how many times I was undecided as to who to vote for. And the way to do it is like this. Firstly, you have to decide whether you want a left-wing party or a right-wing party. Let's deal with the main parties that are just crossing the minimum threshold, not the 39 parties, because otherwise we'll be here for another hour. If it's a right-wing party, you have to choose. Is it Likud, Gideon Sa'ar's party, Naftali Bennett, or maybe Smodrich's party, which is the religious Zionists who need an extra boost. So if you want to go that way, it needs an extra boost. But on the other hand, if they don't cross the threshold, that means you've wasted your vote. So you've got those four parties on the right. If it's on the left, you're talking about the Labour Party, which is polling at 6 seats right now. The Meretz Party, the far left party. If I know Flora, it's probably not going to be the Meretz, but again, you would consider that, or wouldn't consider. And the Arabs, presumably you wouldn't consider the Arab Party. And the other party, of course, is Yesh Atid, which is the secular party. More to the left. Again, is that something you consider? Yes or no? And of course, Avigdor Lieberman. Avigdor Lieberman is a secular party. It believes in secularism completely and believes in traditions, but everyone should be able to do what they want. And again, I don't think you fall in that category from what I know of you, but I don't want to be influencing you. So you're left with those parties, all the religious parties, Shas or United Torah Judaism. So that means out of the 39 parties, we've just whittled it down to Likud, Gideon Sa'ar, Naftali Bennett, Shas, United Torah Judaism, and the Zionist Party, religious Zionists. That's 6 parties. And you have to make that decision as to which one you want to do. If it's the religious Zionists, perhaps they won't cross the threshold. But there again, Netanyahu's saying, if you don't vote for his party, you're going to get Yair Lapid as a prime minister. That's probably not going to happen because Naftali Bennett and Gideon Sa'ar have said they will not allow him to become prime minister because they say the majority of the country is on the right and Yair Lapid is on the left. And therefore, we will not crown him.
Okay.
I hope that answers.
Well, she disappeared.
Oh.
I think Flora wants to say something.
Okay. If the other people don't mind. Hello, Flora. Good evening.
Hold on. Can you demute her? Flora, do you know how to?
Yes. No, I just want to say thank you very much. That was extremely helpful. The only thing is I'm certainly not on the left. I'm a right winger. You know, my family live in the Gush Etzion and I live in Yerushalayim. No, thank you very much. It's amongst the religious parties, amongst the right wingers that I really, and it's a problem, James, with everybody living here. I've spoken to a lot of my friends. I've been here nearly a year now. I'm a citizen, actually, since nearly 19 years ago. So I have the right to vote. I've voted in every election since, so that's it. So thank you. You've helped me. Thank you. I just want to say thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, you don't tell us who you're going to vote for, but I'm glad. And by the way, that wasn't the first time I've said those words. When I was in Jerusalem, I was asked to give so many talks on that subject, and you just break it down. And I have to tell you, I did that a few times myself. And you go into the voting booth, as you know, Flora, and you see the slips in front of you. And many people go into that voting booth and they're still unsure as to what to do. Isn't that amazing? But they know it's within 3 or 4 parties on that right block or left block or the religious block, etc. And for me, I just saw the one slip which was in front of me with the Hebrew letters, which I recognized, and I picked that one up. Okay, that's it. And you stick it in the envelope and you come out and you put it in the box. And by the way, as well, if anyone, and maybe I'll end with this, is that if anyone is thinking about moving to Israel, like Flora did, or has done, or she did 19 years ago, but I think she may have been may still be in Edgeware sometimes. But it's very confusing because you don't actually get to vote according to the parties. You vote according to a Hebrew letter. So whichever party, let's say, for example, Labour has the Hebrew letters Emet, Aleph, Mem, Taf. So you look for that slip in the booth, which is one of my slides, but I forgot to show it. And you pick it up and you put it in the envelope, and that's it. If it's Likud, I just know these from many years, Mahal, Mem, Chet, Lamed. You look for that slip in the tray, you pick it up, you put it inside. Gimel, also another very famous one. Gimel is Yahadut, United Torah Judaism, one of the religious parties. And Tet Zayin, I think it is Yamina, I think. Now, if you can't read Hebrew, you're in shtuch. That's how it is. You're in trouble, because you have to look, when you're lining up, you have to look as to what is the Hebrew letter related to the party that you want to vote for, and it's outside. That's the problem. Or I think in some cases, in very, very, very tiny letters at the bottom of the slip, will actually say the name of the party, but sometimes they change the party. You might be familiar with it by a certain name, and it might have changed its name. That's how it is registered. So it confuses so many people, and I have no doubt that people vote, but they had no intention of voting for that part. They put the wrong slip in the envelope. Something to bear in mind if you ever move to Israel. And we still have this same system, by the way.
Okay. Look, just very briefly, Brenda Greenberg slotted a very, very quick, you've got a 60-second answer to this, but I would like to know the answer as well. I think it's quite a good question. Thank you, Brenda.
Okay.
And the question is, what percentage of the population do you think will vote?
Well, we pretty much know it's around 70%. In the last, I'm somebody who is fascinated by polls, and I spent hours after the results, the official results come out, and looking at the diagrams. So they pretty much know in which area. So for example, Kidumim, Gush Etzion, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Netanya, Ashdod, the Arab areas, the Jewish areas, it's all broken down, and the paperwork, the graphs are amazing, and I'm fascinated by it. So around between 69 to 71, 72% come out and vote. By the way, in the last election and the election before, many people said they were not going to vote, but the percentage of voters didn't actually change.
So that 70% is a normal percentage.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah, good. Okay, right. Well, look, I mean, I think you've broken all records actually, and we've still got 2/3 of our people still here. Our congregation. Wow. So that was great. So I want to thank you very, very much. I mean, it was really, I mean, I've learned an enormous amount that I really didn't know, and I'm sure a lot of people didn't as well. So thank you very, very much. I'll now hand you over to, where is he? Or has he gone home? Are you still here, David?
No, I'm not. No.
Can I just make one point just before David signs off, and that is that there is there's a paper in the UK called the Jewish Weekly, which is available just in London, places in London, Jewish areas in London and in Manchester. So there is actually a full pull-out of the election details, which I write and compile. There's a poll table, there's a bit of information in there. So if you get the opportunity to pick it up in any one of the Jewish stores, Hendon, Golders Green, Edgware, they're all around there. Certain places in Manchester. That's good. The online version is not that great, or I upload stuff to I have a blog with the Times of Israel. So if you just put in Google James Marlow, Times of Israel, and it'll bring you straight to that blog, and then you just scroll down and just choose which election piece that you want to read, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah, well, I know you've had a double page for the last few weeks, haven't you? And I'm an avid reader. I can't wait to get it. It's because it's about, you know, it's my subject, isn't it? The election. So it's sort of just behind Jewish news.
My subject too. Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, I think it's a more. I shouldn't really say this, but it's a more frummy paper somehow.
Yeah, Jewish Weekly is known as a traditional paper, so it's not quite the Hamodia and Yated Ne'eman and the one I wrote for many years, Jewish Tribune, and it's not quite the JC or the Jewish News, which is the secular side, but United Synagogue, Federation, traditional people, modern Orthodox, and people who just don't want to pay for a paper, so it's free.
Right, David.
Like me, I pick it up as well. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. I've also just seen a couple of people just on the screen. It's just come up a thanks. So thank you to Julian, and thank you to some of the other names that also just thanked me. It's been a great pleasure, and I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, James, for being here this evening, and take care and be well. And thank everybody else for coming along this evening and being part of a very interesting evening and learning a bit more about Israeli politics than we knew beforehand. Just before we sign off, I'd just like to let you know that next week we have an Italian Jewish cookery expert by the name of Silvia Nakamulli, who will be speaking to us. And the subject is Pesach isn't Pesach without food, Italian style. And if you'd like to learn to make some kosher for Pesach Italian cookery, then please join us next week. It will be extremely interesting. You will start the evening hungry, and unfortunately, because her food will be made by her somewhere else, we will probably leave the evening hungry, but in the knowledge of knowing how to make some of the food that she presents to us. So hopefully we will see you next week, and take care. Be well, and enjoy the rest of the week. And please God, before too long, we will all be together in the same room having this discussion.
Thank you. Well, I have spoken to her, and she told us that if everybody does behave, she will come round with some goodies. I'm not sure how she's going to do it, but the only way you'll find out is if you're all here. So I look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay. Thank you and good evening. I'm